This is Nahaz, and men lie, women lie, but stats don't lie. Welcome to our 7.12 patch overview just released yesterday. Lots of changes to cover today. And just for those of you who don't know, my patch overviews, they tend to be big picture. I won't necessarily discuss every individual change. And the goal of these is more to understand the philosophy of the patch and how it is going to affect the meta. We try to put a lot more attention on the biggest changes, and we try to put all these individual changes into categories in terms of what the logic is and what the effect is going to be going forward. This is a little bit, if I were to criticize the timing of this patch, it's a little bit puzzling. It's occurring right at the halfway point of the DAC group phase. DAC is a major. It's a very important event in terms of the DPC season. So a little bit surprising that they would release a substantial patch in the middle of it. Even more surprising that they would add a new hero to Captain's Mode with the advent of Pangolier. So Techies is no longer the only hero not in Captain's Mode. I really don't like that they did that in the middle of the major. The rest of it, though, I'm willing to give a pass on just because I think the individual changes are really very, very sensible. They address the biggest issues right now with the meta, and I think they're going to have a really good impact on a lot of different heroes. So I think this is actually one of the better patches that we've seen in recent memory, and so I'm willing to forget about the timing. The changes are very early game focused. The majority, if you look at how the changes are structured in terms of skill damage, cooldowns, mana cost changes, look at how they change with levels. Almost all of them, the biggest impact is to lower level skills, viability of these heroes in the laning phase, as well as this sort of continuous skirmish phase between 12 and 25 minutes. Most of the changes are most pronounced at level 1 and then go away gradually as you go up to level 4. Of the nerfs, the first big theme that we'll talk about is, we talked about this on panel at the last few LAN events that I've been at, that the support meta has become really condensed. And this happened first at the 4 position with the prevalence of Earth Spirit, Sand King, and a couple of other heroes becoming your sort of S tier 4 position heroes. Everybody else taking a back seat. You can add Rubik to that discussion as a 4/5 position flex pick for a lot of teams. The 5 position increasingly has also become very condensed with Disruptor, Witch Doctor, and Rubik taking on that S tier, and a lot of the other heroes fading into the background. And so I think it makes a lot of sense that the majority of the nerfs are to these S tier support heroes. The other nerfs, not a surprise. Over the last 4 versions in the pro game, the 4 most picked heroes in pro drafts have been Tiny, Omni, Razor, and Gyro. All 4 of them ranging from substantial nerf to Tiny to really fairly minor nerf to Gyro, all get nerfed in this version. The 2 remaining cores, pretty moderate nerf to Death Prophet, very small nerf to Life Stealer, in a response to those 2 heroes spiking in popularity at the last DPC events. Of the 34 heroes that were buffed, the biggest unifying theme here is going to be that Agi cores are getting buffed. And this is a topic of conversation. I've seen it a lot on Reddit, heard a lot backstage talent discussions, as well as discussions with pro players the last few events that I've been to, that Agi cores are in a pretty bad place right now for a couple of different reasons. This patch is a lot about trying to bring back those heroes, make them feel a bit more viable. The 7 ranged int supports, this is actually in some ways the flip side of the coin as we talk about the reason that these 10 supports are getting nerfed. It's almost the same reason that these 7 supports are getting buffed, in that all of them are a little bit vulnerable in the laning phase, feel very passive. We're trying to make those heroes a little bit less vulnerable to getting run at in those lanes. The 4 int cores that got reasonable buffs all of them were at some point Bloodstone carriers. One of the biggest item nerfs in the last few versions was the removal of Soul Ring from the Bloodstone buildup. Makes that item feel a lot more awkward to build on these mana-starved heroes, and just the fact that everybody is natively more sustained and more tanky because of the way that regen scales and the prevalence of HOD and other aura items. Those heroes needed some love. Probably my favorite change With the introduction of Refresher Shard, we've seen the return of the AoE initiators. We've seen Tidehunter, we've seen Enigma play big roles in some of these pro matches. Some of the AoE initiators, though, still sitting there on the sidelines. 4 of them get pretty big buffs in this patch. Axe, Darkseer, Magnus, and Slaughter, with Darkseer getting the most substantial rework, Magnus and Slaughter getting moderate buffs, and Axe getting a nice small quality of life change with the Battle Hunger duration. Again, as we've talked about with a lot of these patches, of the 26 heroes that were picked 20 or fewer times in pro matches over the last 4 patches, 20 of them got buffs. So which heroes getting changed and the ways in which they get changed, very much having to do with high-level pub match and pro play. The Dota team is pretty consistently over the last year or so adopted, really 2 years or so, adopted this trickle-down philosophy, and I think it's worked very, very well. The hero that I guess I'm most surprised didn't get changed is Meepo. I think Meepo's pretty garbage right now, but again, when you talk about heroes like Meepo and Huskar, those are very difficult heroes to balance. Very small changes can have a big impact, and Pudge is always going to be an outlier because he's the most popular hero in public matches, so can't really talk about Pudge. Okay, first big unifying topic, and we're going to talk about this on both sides of the coin, the nerfs and the buffs to supports. Over the last 4 versions, you saw in 704, 705, and 706 the huge emphasis that was placed on roaming supports, particularly at the 4 position. You saw these roaming Earth Spirits really kind of own the game. Over the last couple of patches, since 707 was released after the Hamburg Major, the emphasis on roaming has decreased, especially at the pro level, and in its place has risen this increased emphasis on aggro dual lanes. Supports still move around the map. I'm not saying that supports are now static in lane, but supports are no longer moving around the map with the express purpose typically to just gank one hero. It's more like, let's gank this one hero and let's put like 30% damage on his tower, okay? So these ganks are much more purpose driven, which again you would expect as more teams get better at Dota. But the result is that these aggro dual lane combinations and supports that fit in those lane combinations have really gained a huge preference. These aggro dual lanes that just run at you. Think like the Elder Titan dual lanes. Think about Beastmaster and Wisp in NA. Think about Chen and Sand King and the way that that's been run by Virtus Pro, okay? These lanes that can not only control lane equilibrium to some regard, but that can just play in your face and either force your carry to be constantly last hitting under tower, or make him come far forward to be for last hits to be vulnerable to those rotations. The biggest of these changes is probably to Chen. I apologize to Smith because I do like Chen as a hero and I do enjoy watching him played, but the Holy Persuasion send back in the offlane was really annoying to me. It felt very gimmicky. That no longer works. As a result, I think you're going to see Chen's pick rate fall off precipitously at high levels. Elder Titan, this nerf is the aggro dual lane equivalent of what you saw happen to Earth Spirit in the roaming meta. If you think back to in the big support roaming meta, Earth Spirit's level 1, I believe it was the Rolling Boulder slow that got nerfed, and that really hurt that hero's early gank potential, especially in the mid lane, was when mid was getting roamed on constantly. This is kind of the same thing, that low level Echo Stop initial stun being cut by 75%. It really decreases the extent to which Elder Titan can threaten these kill combos in aggro duel lanes, because it used to be that this Elder Titan would run his spirit around, get this huge damage bonus, which he could then refresh, all right, with another cast of the spell. He would stun you once with Stomp, and all of a sudden he'd be in your face, hitting you. At the very least, that was just huge harass potential and would often be setting up kill rotations. So that hero is a lot less viable in these lanes. I still think ET is a really good hero. I actually think ET in some tournaments has been still underpicked, but he's no longer going to feel so threatening during that laning phase. Enchantress gets a little bit of an asterisk because, of course, she's not necessarily a dedicated support. But all three, when we talk about these changes, this is going to be a theme through a lot of these patch notes, that a lot of skills, the changes are to the low level abilities. And in all three cases, The untouchable slow, for example, at level 1 gets cut in half from 40 to 20. Still scales upward very quickly as you put skill points into it, but level 1 untouchable leaves you a lot more vulnerable in lane. The cooldown on enchant much longer now at level 1, even though the slow gets a little bit of a buff, that larger cooldown on level 1 enchant, and then the mana cost of level 1 impetus is a lot higher. Now this is actually interesting. Some of the outlets that I'm seeing out there are actually listing this as a buff to enchanters because the mana cost of level 3 impetus is now actually a little bit smaller, but proportionately I still think this is a nerf. It affects her most in the early game when those level 1 imps are just now a little bit more expensive. She's going to have that much less mana to play with. And as many of the changes that we're going to talk about, these changes are most prevalent at level 1 and go away as you put more skill points into the ability. With Wisp, I think it's kind of the same rationale that we want these Wisp Beastmaster aggro dual lanes to feel a little bit less imba. The base damage of the hero got reduced. Relocate now has a slightly longer cooldown, most noticeable at level 1. And Tether is now reworked where it gives you the same movement speed as your target, and the ability no longer has this cooldown. I think these are all reasonable changes. It's a mild to moderate nerf for the hero, and again, it's going to affect him mostly in the laning phase. Sand King is the other sort of big culprit when we talk about these aggro dual lanes, pairing with the Chen, pairing with a number of these other heroes. The Burrow Strike, level 1 Burrow Strike is already a very difficult to use ability because of the distance that it covers. Now between, sorry, my phone's ringing, between a slight decrease in Sand King's movement speed and a slight decrease in the stun duration associated with level 1 of that ability, I think Sand King is going to feel a lot less threatening at low levels in these dual lanes. And as you can see with many of these abilities, the change scales largest at low skill levels and it goes away. It's, in fact, level 4 Burrow Strike is now slightly longer. Now, not that you're going to notice that 0.03 second duration. Number of other changes to the 5 other supports listed here fit this pattern. Rubik, for example, his level 1 lift cooldown is now 28 seconds, up from 22, but that goes away smoothly as you skill up to level 4, whereas the cooldown on level 4 telekinesis is still 22 seconds, same as before. Bounty Hunter has slightly increased mana cost, I believe, on Shuriken. Tusk, same kind of deal. Really, the only mechanical change here is Disruptor's Q, his Thunderstrike, no longer provides lingering vision after you leave the area of effect. So it disruptors not only his presence in lane in terms of level 1 Thunderstrike is a very mana efficient skill in its nuke potential as well as providing vision, but Disruptor's ability to set up these glimpses and generate these extra kills during what I'm thinking about as the skirmish period from 12 to 25 minutes. It's a bit of a nerf to him. This is sort of the other side of the coin when we talk about the 10 supports that got nerfed. I think the 7 supports that got buffed, it's almost the same reason applied in the opposite direction. That being, in the last couple of patches in high-level play, when you see these squishy intelligence supports in lane, you just run at them, all right? You know, think about the Chen Sand King dual lane and you're playing safe lane Crystal Maiden trying to support your carry. You're just food. These, if you move up to harass or try to deny, these two heroes are just going to run at you. They have this crazy kill combo at level 1 abilities, so you're really not going to do anything in that lane. CM also hurt by the moving back of the creep, the first neutral spawn, and that she no longer gets level 2 for free in the jungle nearly as quickly, and she can't come to lane as early with her 2 nukes both online. But anyway, I think a lot of these changes, the 2 themes, number 1 being increasing the laning viability of heroes, and number 2 being increasing the effectiveness of the skills at low levels. CM now better able to harass with +3 base damage, little bit more mana regen from Arcane Aura that kicks in fast at lower levels, goes away as you scale up, so she'll be able to cast her spells a little more often in lane. Lich, same kind of a deal with low level sacrifice. First level sacrifice, mana restoration now nearly doubled. Just for perspective, you used to have to use level 1 sacrifice 4 times to be able to cast Not even, but almost one level 1 Frost Blast for 125 mana. Now you use Sacrifice twice, and you've almost got that same 125 mana cost. So pretty substantial potential change there. Lion, same deal. Level 1 Lion used to only be able to use Earth Spike 3 times before running out of mana. You can now use it 4 times, 70 mana instead of 100. So pretty nice quality of life change for that hero in lane. Winter Wyvern, same logic. Instead of base damage, he gets just a little bit more base intel, and he gets more attack range bonus provided by Arctic Burn, where it scales downward once again. Level 4 Arctic Burn still provides the same 575 attack range bonus, but the attack range bonus associated with that ability now starts a bit higher, and it scales a bit less steeply as you put skill points into that. Phoenix, Warlock, and Shadow Demon also had their ults improved. We'll talk about Phoenix more a little bit later. Never forget when you see these radius changes to abilities, the area of a circle, guys, is pi r squared. So the movement for a 30% increase in the radius of an ability, it translates into a way more than 30% increase in the area of that circle covered by the ability. So Supernova is going to feel, I think, a lot more effective. Also has this nice little mechanic where it's automatically daytime during that. So you counter Night Stalker, you maybe synergize a bit better with Keeper of the Light. It's just kind of an interesting little change that it feels a little memey, but also feels cool. Warlock is the exception to the rule. There are a few of these changes that are actually more skilled toward the late game. Warlock is one of those. It feels like his golems, once he gets to that level 3 rock, they die fast because the enemy physical damage carry will usually be online by then, and they're not proportionally as effective in split pushing. Now that Warlock, and this is 50 more golem damage from 225 to 275 at max level. Remember, this is going to add up as he gets his ags, as he gets his refresher orb. Those golems are going to do a lot more damage to buildings. The SD Shadow Demon change is one of the 3 or 4 most interesting changes in the patch, alongside Darkseer and Ricky, and maybe a couple others, in that Purge now continuously dispels the target, and that creates some interesting opportunities where you can effectively potentially prevent heroes like Brewmaster and Juggernaut from using their ults at all. Be a little careful with that. It's not completely clear to me how much of that behavior is intended, so I may update you on that in a future video. The cooldown's a little bit more on Purge, on Demonic Purge now. It's 60 seconds instead of 40, but the slow feels a little bit, no longer has a root. The slow feels a little bit more reliable in that it now always scales linearly, and the continuous dispel creates a lot of interesting applications, maybe even makes him an anti-initiator or anti-carry kind of hero. Dazzle also got buffed, but we all know Slacks is secretly Ice Frog, and Slacks hates Dazzle, so level 4 Poison Touch does 12 more damage. I mean, it's actually still not a horrible hero, but it's not a big buff. The big core nerfs. So these are the kind of S tier cores that we've been talking about. Tiny is by far the biggest of these nerfs. Tiny right now is where Monkey King used to be, in that he's this melee core that you can get away with picking very, very early in the draft because he wins so many laning matchups. And the removal, almost cutting in half of his base HP regen, is going to make him feel that much less viable in lane, that much more susceptible to harass with both right clicks and with spells. Remember that that's a even more impactful change because all HP regen in the game scales with strength, and Tiny is a very, very high starting strength hero. So that is going to be amplified even more. Tiny's going to feel a lot less like an auto win in many of these laning situations. Also a 3-second increase to avalanche cooldown at level 1 that goes away as you skill it up. Not just a big thing. The big thing is the laning matchups. Razor, I think this is also a laning change. Razor has always laned well against melee heroes. That's just the design of the hero. But he was feeling like he laned a little bit too well against a lot of ranged heroes as well. This is going to make it so that he has to make 50 less range on static link, means that he has to eat just a little bit more harass to get that spell off on max range lane opponents. The passive damage also, this is actually pretty big It's a pretty big change for a couple reasons. Number one, percentage based, it's huge. Level 1 unstable current used to do 100 damage, it now does 60. That's a big change. And the fact that most players will sit on level 1 unstable current until at least level 8 or 9 with Razor, sometimes even beyond that. So you are going to be seeing quite a bit less damage coming out from that ability. With Death Prophet, similarly, longer restore time on Spirit Siphon. DP is one of these heroes that you can leave alone in the mid lane, and she is a lot less afraid about ganks, because if you bring 2 extra heroes to lane to gank her, she has that much more room to get an extra Spirit Siphon or 2 off and potentially run away and survive. The fact that at level 1, Spirit Siphon charges now take 60 seconds to come back instead of 45 means that she has to be worried about the presence of those roaming supports or the smoked up cores a lot more often during the laning phase. Slight increase in mana cost for silence that actually goes up as you skill the skill up. I think that's not a big deal because DP is going to be building that Yules for mana regen anyway. What is a big deal, Repel now costs almost twice as much mana for Omni Knight, 80 instead of 50, 85 instead of 50. It's a very big deal. These Omnis are using that in a laning phase as both a save and a get out of jail free card for themselves. Omni Knight is already a hero that has mana issues, has to build these multiple small items, typically in Soul Ring, Wand, etc., to deal with that. This matters that much more because of that. So I think that's a pretty good nerf on top of the nerfs that Omni's already gotten in the last few versions. Flat Cannon is kind of the exception to the rule, where I say most of these have been focused on the early game. Flat Cannon is more focused on Gyro's farming potential and skirmish potential as the game goes on. You're going to feel that more at 15, a lot more at 15 minutes than you do at 5 to 10. Homing missile, the team seems to be determined to make killing homing missiles a thing. We already saw the bounty on homing missile get increased in a previous version. Now it's always going to cost 3 hits to kill instead of 4. This is a relatively big nerf to that mid gyro, because we've seen a lot of mid gyros skilling up, prioritizing skilling up homing missile, and this effectively it decreases the point in the game up to which homing missile can be more or less treated as a reliable stun, since you can now kill level 3 and level 4 homing missile a lot earlier. Open wounds on lifesteal, this is by far the smallest nerf on this page, now no longer gets a mana cost discount as you skill it up. It's only 30 mana at level 4. Anytime you talk about strength cores, mana changes are potentially significant, but like I say, lifestealer, that's not usually his big concern anyway, so I don't think that's going to have too big an impact. This is one of the big topics that you've heard about on Reddit and behind the scenes at a lot of events, is why are agi cores in such a bad state? Really, a couple big reasons are given for this. Number one is the removal of Poor Man's Shield. It's set back a lot of heroes like Ember and Slark, to some extent Troll, that used to abuse that Bloodseeker PA, that used to abuse that item in the laning phase. The other reason is, of course, that the scaling movement speed bonus granted by agi feels a lot less impactful notably than status resistance given to strength heroes, and even really less impactful than MR for intelligence heroes. So agi core has been in a pretty bad place now for the last 3 or 4 patches. Ember and Slark, these are sort of direct, Poor Man's Shield substitute sort of changes, where Ember gets a little bit more base armor. Actually, I thought that was actually going to be +2, but +1 is still, it's more significant than you think. Slark gets the HP regen, base HP regen that Tiny lost. He gets 1 full point of that. It's just gonna make him much less vulnerable to getting harassed out of lane. Of the two, the base regen, of course, is the more significant, because that helps you against both physical damage and nukes in lane. And I think Slark really badly needed it. He was one of my bottom 5 or 6 heroes in the game over the last couple of versions. He really needed the love. Troll and TA both get very moderate changes by comparison. So Troll gets it's small improvement in his melee form base attack time. Now, this does scale actually very well with a hero that tends to build attack speed items and has attack speed from his ult. So I think Troll, you're going to see that, and some top teams have been picking him anyway. Versus Pro played around with him. TA, I think a 10 movement speed increase on TA is a lot more significant than a lot of people might think. TA is one of the more positioning dependent heroes in the game in the laning phase, in that she relies on her positioning to get that Psyblade spill harass onto her laning opponent. So 10 movement speed on this hero feels a lot more impactful than it would in some of the other heroes in the pool. Mirana, this is a change that's mostly going to affect core variations on Mirana. It's going to be easier to lane with her, easier to CS with her in lane, because the variation in her attack damage has been cut. She's still doing about the same damage on average, but it's going to be more consistent, so better able to last hit with her. There were a number of utility changes ranging from rather small to fairly impactful to heroes. Bloodseekers, for example, his thirst buff now lingers for 4 seconds instead of 2, making him a little bit more of a threat in the laning phase if you're having action in other lanes. Clinks gets a very small duration increase to strafe, which is nice. PA, which I think is really cool, she can now... Remember a couple patches ago they changed that you can target magic immune enemies with Blink Strike. You can now target magic immune enemies with Stifling Dagger. They still don't get the slow, but the damage still does go through, which is really nice. Just gives her a little bit extra catch. Spectre, I think this is a really nice change, that her Spectral Dagger now does significantly more damage at low levels, and skills a little bit flattens out so that it does almost the same damage at high levels. Really, when you talk about increasing a hero's sustain in lane, like increasing base armor or increasing regen, increasing their harass potential is really the other side of the same coin. So Spectre now has a better chance of being able to harass laning opponents, and better able to sort of get cheap last hits, much like PA does with her dagger from far back with low level Spectral Dagger. So I think that's a nice change for Spectre. It might make her feel just a little bit more viable. Arc Warden gets both a small radius increase on his bubble and a small, I believe it's a cooldown decrease on, I think it's the Spark Wraiths, which is, it's kind of nice. I still think Arc Warden is still very vulnerable to punishing. He's still kind of a cheese. He's always going to be kind of a cheese hero just because of the way that the hero is designed. But I don't mind the buffs. I really like the change to AM. One of the things that the team has tried to do in a number of the previous patches is change AM's ult so that increasing the AoE, increasing the damage, so that he is a little bit more of a team fight presence and isn't just always sitting around farming for 30 minutes in a game. This change, again, going along with the theme that we've talked about, where most of the skill changes are the lowest level of the skills impacted most. The damage on level 1 Mana Void is going from 0.65 to 0.85 per point of mana, and that's a really nice change. It gives the hero a little bit more kill potential at level 6, and again, it's another way to increase the laning viability of the hero. Is as long as you can support him in lane for the first few minutes, when the lane opponents have to start, when that hero is getting toward that level 5 and the lane opponents are having to say, oh wait, when he hits level 6 he could have real kill potential on us, that is potentially a big buff to the hero's viability as a laner that doesn't have to be continuously babysat. Monkey King as well, the base attack time on his Wukong's command soldiers goes from 1.4 to 1.3 seconds. It's a nice change. It's going to make Monkey King feel like a little bit more of a viable team fighter. Sniper and Drow, these are the least significant changes. Sniper, the mana cost on level 3 Assassinate, substantially reduced, goes from 375 to 275. That's a sensible change, given that his high-level talents are geared around, a couple of them the choices are geared around high-level Assassinate, so you want to be able to actually potentially use that skill multiple times in team fights, but I think it's not going to affect the hero too much. Drow, I think, is the least impactful. She gets a little bit more of the scaling on Precision Aura, is now even a little bit steeper, reaches 40% at level 4, a slight increase from what it was before. Still, what really hurt Drow Number one was the nerf to low-level precision aura, because it used to be that picking Drow Ranger meant your mid would have a huge advantage in the first couple of waves. That's no longer the case, with only 10% at level 1 bonus for that skill, and the fact that Drow is one of the most vulnerable heroes in the game to these aggro dual lanes that you're seeing. She hates hitting under tower. She doesn't deal with opposing dual lanes that can shove waves in on her very well. So I think she's still going to be in a bad place as a hero. These tanky Bloodstone carriers, and again, these aren't necessarily heroes that built Bloodstone every game. In the recent past, they all have been Bloodstone carriers, talking about the first 4 listed below at some point. They were both hurt by the removal of Bloodstone, and just in general, the heroes on this page, a lot of them, with the exception of Zeus, these are heroes that are tanky int cores or tanky supports. Well, again, the problem with these heroes is that everybody is more tanky. With all regen in the game scaling and almost every pro team building Helma Dominator and increased options like Magic Wands being a little bit better in the regen they provide, Spirit Vessel being a very powerful item, these heroes that were natively tanky, that's less of a relative advantage. Again, Dota is balance in Dota is about understanding, the worst thing you can say about a hero is not that this hero sucks. The worst thing you can say about a hero is that he sucks because there's another hero that does exactly the same thing and does it better. All right. So it's all about the relative terms. And Leshrac gets a moderate, I would say, buff. Nice small increase in base movement speed to a hero that's already pretty fast. This is a change that's going to affect core Leshrac more. The lightning builds now do more damage. So provided you're a core and you can spam that ability in lane, you have the mana to sustain it, it's going to be more effective as harass. This actually might be a slight nerf to the support Leshrac builds, because the support Leshrac can no longer, the slow actually gets substantially reduced at level 1. Your level 1 lightning is no longer going to be nearly as effective as a setup for your own split earth. So Leshrac, more viable as a core. So you're going to see a lot of teams try that out in the mid or the off lane. But I think you're going to see support Leshrac probably not picked up any more than it was. Necrophos, again, the theme of these ability changes being most significant at the lowest level. Necrophos, level 1 death pulse at 125 mana felt very, very expensive. It was a very mana and healing inefficient spell. Now 100 mana instead of 125, very big deal. And again, that reduction goes down as you go up in levels. Heartstopper, little bit of a change to the way the hero scales, a little bit more. It's like 2.3% instead of 2% damage per second to opposing heroes at max level. Yeah, it's nice, but it's not gonna bring him back by itself. I think the death pulse mana reduction is a much bigger deal for the hero. Timbersaw, again, probably not bottom 5, but definitely bottom 25 heroes in the last 4 versions. And the reduction in level 1 chakra mana cost, both in the initial mana and in the mana per second, now 16 mana per second instead of 20. That's a very big deal for a hero that, if you look at globally, what are the most important item timings, Timbersaw's Bloodstone timing, and recently his Hood Bloodstone timing, shows up. It really shows up historically alongside Animage's Battle Fury, Invoker's Midas, and other things of that nature in terms of the most important item timings for that hero's win rate. So I think this offsets the burden of getting that, be it Bloodstone, be it Yule's, whatever, it offsets Timbersaw's burden of getting that huge mana regen online so quickly in the game. Zeus probably gets the biggest buff on this page. He gets 5 more base damage and 30 more attack range, which is it's a buff both to his Zeus harass potential is based most on spells than right clicks most of the time, but it does make him a better CSer, and it's yet more evidence that Ice Frog misses Merlini and what's him back and hates splits, because Storm Spirit was one of the only traditional Bloodstone carriers not to get a buff. I'm going to put these 3 supports on the same page. A little bit debatable. These might be better served by talking about in their own category, but Ogre Magi, Treant Protector, and Undying, 3 supports that all been traditionally tanky, but now that with Tree and Undying, like, Living armor, first of all, you're seeing a lot of these minion strats where living armor charges, against a, say, Beastmaster with summons, a Necrobook, or a Chen is just garbage. And the heal of living armor is a lot less valuable because so many heroes now have, because of the way regen scales and the item builds that people are using, so many heroes have higher health regen than before anyway. Undying, same kind of thing. The idea with Soul Rip, that heal, number one, that heal losing a lot of value, and Tombstone feeling very vulnerable against heroes like PL or these minion strats. Undying gets a decent size buff in that his Tombstone zombies now go into their frenzy state at I believe it's 75 instead of 50 HP, and Flesh Golem, the damage amp from Flesh Golem, I'm sorry, not the damage amp, but the heal that he gets from Flesh Golem is actually much more substantial. It's now 20% instead of 10% of the killed hero. I believe it's of killed hero's health at max level. It's going to make Undying feel a lot more tanky in team fights. I think Flesh Golem is one of those abilities. It's kind of like Sanjin Yasha used to be before they added the sound effect for MAME. That once it became more obvious in the game that the item was doing something, everybody started picking up S and Y. In this case, like, Flesh Golem is a really impactful ability. The damage amp and the self-heal from that ability can really be important in fights, but it's not obvious in a lot of situations that the ability is doing anything, okay? Because it scales based on how close you are to Undying. I'd like to see some kind of visual effect or sound effect for that put into the game. I still like Undying as a hero, but he's kind of in a bad place. This is my favorite by far category of changes, the forgotten AoE initiators. So I've talked on panel a bit about the fact that I think Refresher Shard was the best change in Dota 2 in the last couple of years because it's brought back these AoE initiators like Tidehunter and Enigma. There's still some AoE initiators out there that don't fall into this category. Darkseer is the biggest one, and I think Darkseer, this is such a good change to him. The way he was reworked, the radius on low-level vacuum was substantially increased, but the cooldown was more than doubled from 32 to 60 seconds. Living proof that even when Darkseer gets buffed, Ice Frog still has to increase the cooldown on vacuum. Me very much. In all seriousness, though, this is really, really good. One of the issues with Darkseer is he used to be a hero that could lock down that lane solo. He would get you that early mech, but because of the way his skills scaled, his team fight wasn't really online until a lot of times level 11 or 12, and he would build Blink as like a second item. Well, I mean, that's just too late now, right? Darkseer isn't necessarily that good in a lot of these aggro dual lanes because low-level vacuum, 250, like level 1 vacuum is, in the previous versions, was good for canceling TPs and not that much else. And it wasn't even really good at canceling TPs a lot of time because the cast range wasn't that great. Now vacuum has substantially larger AoE. Remember, almost doubling the radius does not double the area of the circle. It's an almost 4 times increase in the area of the circle. So this is a very, very big deal. You might actually, in certain lineups, definitely not every game, but in certain lineups, you might actually see Darkseer go first item Blink. And I think that it also makes the hero feel a lot more threatening in certain lane combinations with heroes like, I don't know, maybe Alina or Senking that have these reliable stuns that if they hit on multiple heroes can set up a multi-kill for you in the laning phase. So I think that vacuum CD is, the vacuum rework is a really good change. Wall of Replica was just something that needed to happen. The meme over the last couple of events talking about Darkseer was pretty much that why in the world would you pick Darkseer for Wall of Replica when Terrorblade has reflection that's better in most respects. And so I think Wall of Replica really needed a buff. Together with the incoming damage being reduced from 400 to 300%, the wall is just a little bit wider, and together with the increase in low-level vacuum viability, I think Darkseer is going to feel a lot more like a team fight threat a lot earlier, and that's really critical. It's not enough right now, given that skirmish period in these pro games from 12 to 25 minutes that immediately follows the laning phase in the majority of games. It's not enough for your offlaner to just be able to be self-sufficient and lock down lanes by himself. All right, your offlaner has to be somebody that can come to those, even threaten the earlier rotations, but at the very least be able to come to those fights at 10 to 15 minutes. And Darkseer's not really a hero that excels at that as he was. I think these changes are going to make him a lot more viable in that respect. Slardar, the next most substantial buff, Sprint no longer has that 15% damage in. Again, on this theme with these AoE initiators, one of the problems that we've seen with heroes like Slardar, like Axe, like Centaur is they're heroes that, number one, they can have trouble getting their Blink Dagger online to begin with. And number two, if their Blink Dagger is even a little bit delayed, or even sometimes if it's timely against certain enemy comps, they still feel like they need another item. Like if you're Centaur, oh great, I have my Blink Dagger, but it still feels like I need a hood to be able to farm. If you're Axe, oh great, I have my Blink Dagger, but it still feels like I need Blade Mail or Vanguard to be able to actually do anything when I'm hitting those calls. So Slardar similarly, like, oh great, I have my Blink Dagger, but if I have Sprint on for mobility and I blink in, I can get off a good crush, but then I'm going to get bursted down anyway by their backlines. So I think this is a really good quality of life change for Slardar. Makes it so that once Slardar has that, makes it so that he can be more active pre-blink without fearing getting bursted down. Makes it so that once he gets that Blink Dagger up, he doesn't feel like he needs another item to be viable. And I think that that's really good. When you talk about the Refresher Shard bringing these heroes back, like Slardar and Axe are AoE initiators, but they don't really benefit from that too much because they're not as cool. They're not cooldown reliant like Ravage or Black Hole or even Reverse Polarity. So I think it was important for these heroes to get buffed. Axe, I actually wish he'd gotten a slightly larger buff, but we'll see. Battle Hunger is actually pretty good in terms of its damage potential. It's actually a ridiculously efficient skill. We're just going to see how viable that hero is. Magnus, I think this needed to happen. Magnus was a hero that had gotten nerfed, and again, the theme of these AoE initiators, Magnus, with the increased mana cost on Empower, with all his other skills being relatively expensive, he was a hero that was having to build multiple regen items like Wand and Arcanes and Soul Ring and some combination of those, and Bottle, which sucks anyway. So Magnus's blink had been getting sort of de facto delayed, okay? Now, at least when you're hitting the skewer, the reverse polarity early on, at least it's going to feel a bit more impactful. That half-second extra stun duration, I believe from 2.25 to 2.75 seconds on level 1 RP, that is a pretty big deal. The changes, I also cheated a little bit earlier. When we're talking about these AoE initiators and ultimates, the prevalence of those, we arguably should be filing Phoenix or Warlock changes under that category as well. But again, notice how most of these changes are going to be most relevant in that early and mid game, continuing one of the big themes throughout the patch. Okay, so to wrap things up, tricks of the trade. This is actually, when I first saw this, I was like, big deal. I actually really like this change the more I've thought about it. Ricky, again, the meme with Ricky has been, why would you pick Ricky when you got Bounty? One of the things that's really big for these kind of like roaming or action-oriented supports like your Ricky. Think about Earthshaker, right? Earthshaker fell off big time when the guaranteed damage from his Echo Slam was removed. And one of the big reasons for that is that your support, your forward-positioned Earthshaker couldn't really threaten these pickoffs anymore. You didn't have to be worried nearly as much when that Earthshaker was off map, okay? Ricky, Tricks of the Trade used to hit every hero in the radius at 1 second intervals. It now hits a random individual hero every half second, actually scales down to like 0.4 seconds at level 3, but you can basically still say twice as often. And the reason that's good is actually gives Ricky a lot more solo pickoff potential as a support, where you now have to respect that level 6 Ricky being off the map a lot more. And that's when you talk about the way that pro teams value heroes. You know, one paradigm, all-encompassing paradigm for how pro teams value heroes, particularly at the 3 to 5 position. You ask yourself, when this hero is off map, has been out of vision for a while, how much do I have to adjust? How much do I have to fear? How much does it threaten? How much do I have to play differently? Okay. That's the kind of change I think that could be very impactful. You're of course going to see these agi stacking core rickies in your pubs get solo pickoffs, and that's going to be annoying. But I think this was a needed change for the pro level. Spirit Vessel, this was my favorite item in the game for a while. It kind of still is, but it probably needed a nerf. It was a little bit too good. The problem is that a lot of heroes that Spirit Vessel was inordinately good against, in particular Timbersaw, were natural hood carriers. And hood, of course, did nothing to offset the damage that you were getting from Earn. It used to be 3% direct HP manipulation. It's now treated as magical damage, which means that MR, a lot of other things, will reduce it. It does have interaction with magic immunity as well. So Spirit Vessel is going to feel a lot less crippling. It's still going to take his regen away from reactive armor. So Timber is still going to hate being Spirit Vessel and is still possibly going to have to build Yules in response, but it's going to feel a lot less impactful once he gets that Hood of Defiance online. There are minor buffs to Refresher Heart, Moonshard, Satanic Basher, and Abyssal. The biggest of those is probably the 2 more mana regen per second for Refresher Orb. Again, making supports rushing that item feel just a little bit more viable, making the Tide Hunters rushing that item feel a little bit less pressure on their mana pool, although there it's mana pool rather than regen that's relevant. Miner's Silver Edge, this was the other thing. A reasonable substitute for a Bristleback buff is a Silver Edge nerf. The break duration on Silver Edge is down from 4 seconds to 5. This is something I've been talking with a couple of talent and pros about, that the ulti orb change to Silver Edge meant that Silver Edge, it's still a really expensive item, but it can be fit into a lot more core builds now. I think about, your Faceless Voids, Dragon Knights, whatever, building it. And it's just such a huge hard counter to Bristleback in particular. It being now to 4 seconds from 5 seconds, it's a nice sort of mini buff under the table to that hero. Its cooldown is a little bit less. Clarity, again, everybody's been building Clarity because all mana regen skills with it now, down from 3.2 base regen a second to 3, and Nullifier, the projectile speed, gets decreased. Nothing to really think about there. All right, so that is 7.12. Overall, I feel that this is a very high quality patch, addresses a lot of the issue with stagnation in the support pool, with bringing Agi here, Agi cores, as well as Teamfight and some of the Teamfight initiators that had felt like they'd fallen by the wayside back online. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I will be back soon with another Stats Don't Lie.